Shabbat Shalom. Today we mark Tisha B'Av, and pretty much no one cares. It is perhaps the least observed, the least recognized, the least cared about holiday in the entire Jewish calendar. Why? Tisha B'Av happens in the summertime. We got other things to do. Begins in the evening. In the summertime, 9:45 p.m., I'd otherwise be sleeping. I wish I were sleeping. Right? Tisha B'Av happens outside the religious school calendar. Therefore, few people but Jewish kids at summer camp observe it. There are lots of reasons why Tisha B'Av have really fallen out of observance, especially among the American Jewish community. And I might suggest that among those reasons is at the very heart of the day itself. What is the central message of Tisha B'Av, the central message of this, the saddest day of the Jewish year? Power and responsibility. That's it. That's the central message of this, the saddest day of the Jewish year. Power, responsibility, and who has it and who doesn't. That's the central message of Tisha B'Av. Now, we have wrestled with notions of power since the very beginning of creation. You could turn in your Chumashim to Genesis chapter 1. And the moment that humans are created, what does God say? Here, you've got power. You've got power over the fish of the sea, the birds in the air, the lands, the animals on land. You have power. Of course, the moment God says you have power, it doesn't mean we have all of God's power. Because what does God say we can't do? This is all yours, all of it. All of earth is yours. All of the animals, all of the birds, all the sea creatures. But don't eat from the fruit of the tree. What do? We eat from the fruit of the tree. What do you mean you're going to tell us no? Because the snake, with some words, had power over us. Not strength, not might. Words had power over us. And then what happens next? The very next generation, after God says, here you have control over the animals on earth, the birds in the sky, the fish in the sea, what happens? Cain kills Abel. And God says, you missed it. I said the animals on land, I said the birds in the sky, I said the fish in the sea. God says, I didn't say you have power over each other. But what happens? Cain kills Abel. Cain kills Abel. And now we have one powerful human being lording his power over a less powerful human being. And God is angry. And God sees that there is a flaw in the human system. And so God gives us a really thick book to try to help us overcome the flaw in the system. And not just the Torah, not just the 5 books of Moses, the entire Bible, the entire Hebrew Tanakh is a commentary on what happened when Cain kills Abel. And Cain says to God, "No, am I my brother's keeper?" And God says, "Yeah, you are. You humans have a lot of power, but you don't have all the power. Take some responsibility." That's what our books are about. Take some responsibility. Now that brings us to an interesting conversation about our holiday of Tisha B'Av, this 9th day of the Hebrew month of Av, the saddest day on the Jewish calendar, the day we mark, among many other tragedies, the destruction of the first Holy Temple and the destruction of the second Holy Temple on the exact same day. And of course, we know the story of what happened to the first Holy Temple. And I want you to picture it for a moment. Here I am right in the center. I'm little Israel. I'll reframe it. I'm not even little Israel. I'm little Judah. Because the 12 tribes of Israel in a civil war had divided. And the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom of Assyria had already been destroyed and scattered into the winds by Assyria in the 8th century BCE. Now here we are in 586 BCE, some 2,500 years ago. And just this little kingdom of Judah is left. 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin. Some Levites hanging out around the Holy Temple. And of course, the subset of Kohanim among them. They're a little tribe, they're a little village, they're a little kingdom. And who's the powerful kingdoms of the day? We have the Babylonians over here in the east in modern-day Iraq, and they control the entire east. And we have Egypt, the other powerful kingdom, over here in the west, and they control the entire west. And who's stuck in between the 2 great powers? Judah. Little Judah. And so when the Babylonians are warring over the Egyptians, because the Babylonians want to be the most powerful, and the Egyptians want to be the most powerful, so they're fighting each other. Who's stuck in the middle? Judah. Who ultimately gets destroyed by the Babylonians? Judah. Now, why was Judah destroyed by the Babylonians? Easy. They didn't have the military to defeat the 2 mightiest countries in the world. They didn't have the hard power. They didn't have an air force to stand up to the 2 mightiest countries in the world. They didn't have soft power either. They had no bank account left. They had no treasury to continue paying the Babylonians to leave them alone. So what happens? The Babylonians come in and destroy, and we suffer. That's the first temple. What about the second temple? Fast forward some 500 years, 600 years later, and here we are in 70 of the Common Era, really about 1950 years ago. Rome is in charge of the entire Middle East. And what happens? Little Judah wants to have a little autonomy, a little control. So we stage an uprising. And the Romans squash us like bugs. Because they're Rome, and we're Judah. We didn't have the military might to defend ourselves against the Romans. We didn't have the bank account, the economy, to continue to pay the Romans to leave us alone. So Judah gets destroyed again. The Holy Temple again gets destroyed. So why were the Holy Temples destroyed, according to our rabbis? What happened on Tisha B'Av? What led to the destruction of the holiest place on earth, not once, but twice, and on the exact same day? Interestingly enough, the rabbis don't say, yeah, we didn't have enough military power. The rabbis don't say, if we wouldn't have had a better economy, we could have handled this differently. The rabbis say the holy temples were destroyed. The first one, because of our failure to worship God properly, because of idolatry and sexual immorality. And why was the second temple destroyed? Many of us know the 2 words most often connected to it: sinat chinam, baseless hatred, senseless hatred of one Jew against another. Another commentary in the Talmud about why Jerusalem was destroyed, and this one I like best. It actually says that Jerusalem was destroyed because we were operating within the letter of the law. That's a weird commentary. Jerusalem was destroyed because we were operating within the letter of the law. When we look at that conversation, what we actually see is that, our ancestors were operating within the letter of the law, but they should have been kinder. They should have been more compassionate. They should have gone beyond the letter of the law in their love for their fellow Jews. And that's why Jerusalem was destroyed. The rabbis could have blamed the Babylonians for the temple's destruction. The rabbis could have blamed the Romans for the temple's destruction. But who do the rabbis ultimately come to blame? Who's responsible for the destruction of the holy temples? We are. We are. Fascinating. The rabbis see an entire lack of power among our ancestors. We have no military power. We have no economy. No soft power. So we take power back by saying, you know what? It was our spiritual failings that led to the destruction of the holy temples. it was our fault. It's an awesome act of reclamation of power. It's not their fault. It's our fault. We did it to ourselves. Power and responsibility. Now, it's interesting to talk about this holiday of Tisha B'Av when just a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, I was in Israel, and it looks great. It's thriving. It's bustling. It's beautiful. Just before I was in Israel, by the way, Rabbi Dallin was in Israel. Just before Rabbi Dallin was in Israel, by the way, Chazan Propus was in Israel. And here we are marking Tisha B'Av, the destruction of the temples, the downfall of Jerusalem. Just a show of hands, how many of you have ever been to Israel? It's pretty impressive. And here we are marking the downfall of this country. I would say that the early Zionists learned well from the Jewish lack of power. We had all sorts of spiritual power for 2,000 years. We had koach and we had ruach. We had strength and we had spirit. We had faith. We had community. But Jews were killed for 2,000 years because we didn't have power. Hard power. Jews were killed because we didn't have guns or bombs or rockets or an air force or an infantry. And so what's the first thing that the early Zionists do while they're settling the land? They acquire weapons. Because Jews die when we don't have a way to protect ourselves physically. We have to have hard power. What we see over the years, 1948, 1967, even 1973, Jews stopped dying because we had hard power, because we had a military that was able to protect us. But after 1973, hard power only stopped us from dying. Hard power was not able to help us live. Hard power only stopped us from dying. Hard power was not able to help us live. So, because of the Yiddish cup, what does Israel do? It starts developing soft power, innovation, technology, economy, healthcare, agriculture. And all that leads us to the Abraham Accords, the most amazing thing perhaps that happened to Israel over the last couple decades. When all of a sudden our neighbors are saying, hey, Israel, we like you because we can benefit from you. We need your resources. It's not just enough that they're afraid of us, so they're not attacking us militarily. Now they want to be friends with us because of soft power. And just really, I think in recent times too, Israel is coming to grips with the reality, the realization that it needs spiritual power too. Just as the rabbis reclaimed that spiritual power after the destruction of the temples and said, you know what, we have what to say about power and responsibility. Israel's now coming to grips with that truth too. What does it mean to have hard power? What does it mean to have soft power? And what are our obligations? What are our ethical obligations now that we have power? Because guess what? Israel has power. She's not invincible. Iran is still out there. The Russians are still in Syria. Israel is not invincible. Rockets are flying into Israel right now. She's not invincible, but she is powerful. Israel is powerful, and we have an obligation to behave morally and ethically with the power that we do have. Which brings us back to Tisha B'Av and the world in which we live today. Power and responsibility. And I think today, in our world, both here at home and abroad, who are the most powerful? Those who claim to be powerless. Who are the most powerful? Those who claim to be powerless. Because by and large, the world is often acting in kindness and compassion, which is a wonderful thing. But it's a naive kindness and compassion, and whomever claims to be the victim is now the one that has all the power. Whomever claims to be the victim is now the one with all the power. We see it in the Middle East, and there are certain groups of people constantly claiming to be the victims and blaming others. We see it at home with certain elections where people are constantly claiming to be the victims and saying they have no power, and in that way, they are trying to claim all sorts of power. Through their victimhood, they're claiming power. So I want to bring us back to the message of Tisha B'Av then today. Why were the temples destroyed? Not because of the Babylonians, and not because of the Romans, but because of us. And I think the message of this Tisha B'Av, in addition to the powerful needing to be self-reflective about their ethics and their morals, but I think the message of Tisha B'Av is that all of us have power, that all of us have responsibility, and that when things don't go our way, when things don't work out quite the way we anticipate them working out, we have to take some responsibility ourselves. What did I do wrong? What can we do better? I think the world will be a much better place if we stop blaming others and start taking responsibility ourselves. This Tisha B'Av, I invite you to be reflective with me about the nature of power and responsibility. In what ways must our power be limited because of ethics and morality and our obligation to remember that we were strangers once in Egypt, and we can't make others feel strangers now? And let's remember the message of Tisha B'Av, that when things go wrong, sure, it's easy to blame others, but at the end of the day, we have some responsibility ourselves, and let's take that responsibility. Adonai oz le'amo yitain, Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom. This day of Tisha B'Av, may we come to grips with power and responsibility. May God grant us the strength and the knowledge of ethics to balance that strength. And most of all, may God bless us, may God bless Israel with peace. And let us say together, Amen.